Welcome to episode 20 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bond.
And today we've got an excellent young guest, a young lady called Erina Brown, who is a Rubbish Talk listener herself, but more of her later. First of all, a quick rundown of things that have caught our attention in the big bad world of waste management.
Yes, and we're back on disposable vapes again, because we love the fact that the UK now are looking to ban single-use disposable vapes. I think we talked about Scotland last time, going to ban single-use disposable vapes. And it would be so good if we can get all the nations working together, Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales, to actually ban these single-use vapes. It's just, I went into the corner shop the other day and there was a guy buying some watermelon flavoured vapes, and he must have been about 12. No, he was very young. And I just thought,
you did see a man there, Jane.
I did say a man, but he was very young. I would have gone for like possibly 16, but yeah, I didn't even ask for any ID or anything. But yeah, hopefully we can get that banned.
We'll see. Well, it was interesting to note that one of the waste management contractors, Bin Farm, we've previously had Jim Brown, the director from Bin Farm, on the podcast, and their organisation has actually gone out and bought themselves a fire engine for their site because they're that concerned about fires from both vapes and batteries. They've actually gone and bought themselves a fire engine, and in a sense, it's I put up a bit of a post on LinkedIn, and it was really saying that the waste industry is forever getting things thrown at it, and it's just got to deal with it and adapt to it. And sometimes you wonder if the waste industry shouldn't be pushing back much harder and saying to organisations, saying to producers, saying to the public, you can't do these things. But that's pretty hard to put in place. So interesting that they've actually gone out and bought it wasn't a shiny new fire engine, but it was a fire engine.
Well, if you're going to buy anything, why not buy a fire engine, eh? And I've been chatting to a lot of people recently about food waste contamination and why people don't put their food waste in their food waste bins. But it's been quite interesting because I also saw an article from it's from Suez, and they've joined a coalition called Enrich the Earth, which incorporates quite a number of different organisations, also the National Trust, the Royal Horticultural Society and the Horticultural Trade Association along with this. And basically they're saying, we need to increase the proportion of households composting at home. And at the moment it's like 33%. And they want to increase it from 33%. I think 33% is probably being a bit optimistic, but they wanted to increase it from 33% to 50%, which would save 1 million tonnes a year from needing processing through the residual waste route. And we were talking about what does stop you doing the food waste contamination, food waste. And I'm saying, right, in my local authority, I've got a 240 litre brown bin, and I have my little caddy in my kitchen, and I fill that, and then I put it in my big brown bin, and then I put all my garden waste in it and put it out. And it's easy, it's simple. But some people I was talking about were saying, oh yeah, but then we have to put this caddy thing out, and then it kind of like blows about in the wind and food gets all over the place, and then there's maggots in it, and that's why we don't do it. I was like, all right, okay. And Alistair's got a different experience. You don't have a 240 litre bin.
No, so your bin, so your food waste is getting mixed with your garden waste, and that'll be going for in-vessel composting. Whereas the likes of in South Ayrshire we've got a little caddy for the kitchen, and then we've got a larger caddy that goes out on the street side, and that gets picked up once a week, and that's going for anaerobic digestion, so that all they're wanting is the food waste. I have never known my food waste caddy to blow away because it's normally fairly heavy. Well, very occasionally, once it's emptied, it'll blow away. But when it's got food in it, it'll certainly not blow away. And certainly, you'll not get maggots if the food waste is only 1 week old. You'll not get maggots. And when you think about it, in Scotland, most residual waste is either collected 2 weekly or 3 weekly or 4 weekly. So if you want maggots, the way to get maggots is to not segregate your food waste.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The vast majority of food waste collections in Scotland are weekly. So I can't imagine going back to putting food in my residual bin, and it's beyond me why less than 20% of the population actually segregate food waste. And there's huge savings in terms of cost, and there's huge savings in terms of carbon, which I've been promising to do this for ages. I'm going to do a wee bit of a calculation, a wee bit of a summary for next podcast in terms of what the savings actually are, because they're quite significant, running into the millions. So
yeah, watch this space.
Watch this space. But next time somebody says they're not doing it because X and that, they're not doing it because they're lazy and can't be bothered. That's really why they're not doing it.
I suppose, but if there's like nearly 70% of the population not doing it, there must be quite
over 80%.
80% of the population not doing it. There must be strong barriers that we really need to overcome. There must be something.
Because they've never been told by any organisation that they must do it. Nobody has gone along and said to them, "You must do that," because if you're not putting out your food waste, then your residual waste is contaminated.
Yeah.
We've never done that.
Right, okay, what we need is a bit of backbone there then, Alistair. Off you go. We'll give you your big stick.
We need somebody to go out. It needs to come from top. It needs to come from national government. The savings are there to be had in terms of money, in terms of carbon. Why have we spent a fortune putting in all this recycling system and we're not actually telling the public to use it? And if you think about it, the whole public health thing about waste management is the reason for a weekly bin collection was all to do with the life cycle of fly and to stop maggots and so on. So we've now changed that. So most residual waste is 2 weekly, 3 weekly, 4 weekly. We've changed that and we've put a food waste collection in it weekly, but only 20% of the population is using it. So we're actually creating a situation where the residual waste is full of maggots, it's full of potential infection, it's full of bioaerosols that has implications.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of that kind of laziness, but I also think that there are some issues with collections as well. There's some councils where the collections aren't absolutely as good as they could be. And again, if they're not as good as they could be, they put people off.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Well, where I live, the council, the staff, what they would do is they would come back. So most people presented their bin the night before. So what they would do is they'd finish their normal round, and they would sneak back and pick up the bins, and empty them, which is fine. So effectively you're getting done a day early. But then what happened was when they came back the next day, they never actually caught the bins they'd missed, or the bins that hadn't been presented by the time that they'd been done. Unfortunately, because I know the people at South Ayrshire, I was able to have a wee word and say, look, this is what they're doing. Why they were doing that, I'd have no clue. I think it was just so they could finish their next day a bit earlier or whatever. So I think it's just, you're right. If a collection's not happening weekly like it should be, then you will get people not presenting and so on.
Yeah, and I guess if you're in flats and stuff as well, and you've got a communal food waste bin, it could be a bit smelly.
Yeah, I agree. I think the flats is a separate issue with food waste, and everybody's got to use it properly for it to work. But again, generally flats will get a collection more frequently. they'll not even be weekly. They'll be more frequent than weekly. So they get an even better service. So anyway, so next podcast, I will have some facts and figures for you, Jane, about how much money we can save, hopefully.
Okay, perfect.
I promise. Anyway, going totally off at a tangent, one of the things that drew my attention, obviously, we've been seeing TV programs about floods in Libya and stuff. That drew me back to somebody I mentioned before, Howard Dryden, who is part of this GEOS Foundation. And one of his articles, which we'll share, he's been very vocal about this, that the Mediterranean is going to be exposed to that type of flood much more regularly because of the damage. So it's not so much climate change, it's just the amount of pollution in the water that's changed how the Mediterranean Sea operates, sucks up more water into the atmosphere, and then you get these devastating floods. So really interesting stuff he's got there, but really scary stuff. But one of the ones I noticed when I was having a wee search around was part of their project is they've been going around the ocean. He retired from business a few years ago and sailed around the world. But as part of that sailing around the world, he was testing for microplastics. And really sadly, one of their boats was in Loch Ness, and they found over 100 microfiber plastics per litre of water in Loch Ness. So it just shows you, and this is similar, they found microplastics all around, Antarctica, the middle of the ocean and so on. The microplastics are every place. Which brings us on to our next guest.
Yeah, well, I was just actually going to say I'm really sad about Loch Ness because poor Nessie. I mean, how many particles is she going to be swallowing while she's swimming around Loch Ness? Anyway, our next guest was introduced to us by Chris Eccles, who is a former Albion employee. He worked with us a few years ago, and he went on to work for a company called Seawater Solutions, which is really interesting because that kind of looks at ecosystem losses and erosion from coastal communities around the world. And we'll put the email address and link to that as well, but it's looking at, there's a lot of creating wetlands and things like that, which is quite impressive actually, and developing crops which grow in brackish and salty water. So he was the link to our next guest on our podcast.
So our next guest is a young lady called Erina Brown. So Erina first contacted me when she was doing her MSc about a year or so ago, courtesy of Chris linking us up. She then contacted us much more recently after she'd listened to Jenny Grant's podcast, Jenny Grant from RIA, about composting, and she particularly loved the fact, and I'd forgotten about this one until this other day, that Jenny had given this fact about recycling 1 kilogram of food waste is equivalent to recycling 25,000 plastic bottles. So get using that food. If you're not using that food waste caddy, get using that food waste caddy. So Erina did an MSc on microplastics from plastic recycling, and she's now in a full-time role, but she's moving on to doing a PhD in microplastics. So we're getting a bit of a deep dive into microplastics and some of the issues they may cause. So over to Erina Brown.
Hi, Erina, nice to meet you. You're one of our younger guests, and it's really good to have you. You've got some great discussion that we want to do on this microplastics. So I guess the first thing is, I mean, you can tell us who you work for at the moment, a bit of background, but we really want to hear about your plastics. So we can start off with that. Go on then.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me, both of you. Yeah, before I start rambling on about microplastics, as I tend to do, I work for Atkins, or as we've now, as of last week, been renamed to AtkinsRealis. So I work in the Bioresources team, which is, we do a lot of looking into wastewater and sewage sludge, basically. So it's looking into the treatment and the processes of sewage sludge, but a lot of looking into any resource recovery we can do from that, and kind of building into, you know, circular economy. And we're getting much more involved in discussions and projects on resource recovery and circular economy and things like that. I've not been working for the team for massively long. I started in about May, so about 5 months now, but it's great. And I think for me, I really like it. Obviously, it's not as in the waste management as a lot of what yourselves do and a lot of the people that you have on the podcast, but it's kind of a nice intersection between like water quality and waste management, which are both big interests of mine. But before I started with AtkinsRealis, I first spoke to Alistair last year when I was doing research into microplastics from plastic recycling facilities. So there's not very much research on the processes that go on at plastic recycling facilities, and if the water that's used through those processes becomes polluted with microplastics. So I started this research when I was doing my MSc, and then I kind of continued it, and it grew a bit, and I ended up publishing a paper in it, that we basically took samples of the water at a certain facility, and analysed whether there was microplastic pollution, and analysed how effective the filtration at that facility was being. And I got really into microplastics doing it. And yeah, I think it was really interesting, and I think it's a side of waste management and recycling that people haven't really thought about before.
It's quite interesting actually, because you think about, you know, recycled plastics, and they're going through, shredded, getting washed, and then that wash water is getting treated or whatever it's happened to it, and then it's getting discharged. And you kind of think, you kind of don't think about the microplastics because you're thinking more about the wash water and all that sort of stuff. So what kind of volume of microplastics were you finding? Was it quite a significant volume?
Yeah, quite a scary volume, to be honest with you. So as you say, you know, the plastics go through and they get shredded, and I think when we think about it logically like that, it kind of makes sense that we're generating a lot of microplastics, because we're literally cutting up with a knife mill, cutting plastics up into smaller plastics, and it's not a surprise that tiny little particles get washed off in the water. But we found, so I took samples before they had installed any filtration, and then after they'd installed a certain filtration. But even after that filtration, we found up to 75 billion particles per meter cubed were in the water.
Oh my goodness, that is a lot of plastics. So why aren't they coming out through the filtration system? Is this because they're too small, or is that why?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So so there had been, when I undertook this research, there had been 2 other papers that looked into this this area of study, and they'd found much smaller numbers, but they were looking down to about 100 microns size of particles. And what we looked down to 1.6 microns, so obviously a lot smaller. And so, yeah, the filtration that this facility installed was a 50 micron pore mesh size. And so, you know, we found that around that size of particle that they were being filtered out, and so it was working for the size of particles that I guess they'd intended for. But the fact that we looked down to around 1 micron, anything under 10 microns just was completely flowing through and was getting released. And obviously there's in the past few years, there's lots of like nanoplastic research that's emerging. And so we logically know, obviously we didn't prove it in this study, but we logically know that there would also be a lot of particles under 1.6 microns as well that we just didn't show.
That's it's quite interesting, that, isn't it? And I suppose it's like, how do you get rid of them? Because you go down to a smaller and smaller mesh size, and then you get the actual system itself then slows and slows and slows. So I suppose it's a bit of a kind of conundrum, shall we say, how you kind of manage that or deal with it, because we're talking about trying to recycle and recover as much plastics as possible. So is there a different way of doing it, or what kind of how do we do that then without releasing all these particles and they get eaten by all the fish and God knows what else? What any thoughts around that, Erina?
No, it's a very good question. It's the obvious question to ask, isn't it? And I would like to have a better answer, because I feel a little bit like in the research that I did, I looked into the problem and I didn't really come up with any sensible solutions. But I think part of, it's a really new research field, and part of it, we need to quantify the problem in order for us to start actually realizing what solutions we can find. But as you say, there has been research that's shown that certain types of filtration or treatments will work relatively well. So like membrane bioreactors, for instance, that are used in wastewater treatment plants have been shown to be pretty effective. But as you said, Jane, it needs to be scaled up to massive volumes and massive amounts. And look, this 75 billion particles, they're obviously all very small particles, but running it constantly, it needs to be scaled up and to the volumes that we're looking at. And I don't know, it's not saying that there aren't any, but I don't know of any technological solutions that are currently feasible in terms of cost and volume, that we could start to deploy it at the scale that we need. So yeah, as you say, plastic recycling has been kind of touted as the solution that we need, and I've read some of the UN documents on I think it's like turning off the tap or something, that were around the same time as Inc. 2 in Paris earlier this year and things like that. And one of their main solutions for the global plastic problem is to massively increase plastic recycling rates. And I think it needs a serious look at whether this is just creating a different or potentially worse problem for ourselves down the line in not too distant a future. But I mean, my opinion, and I think my opinion with all of waste management, is that it needs to be reduced upstream rather than just relying on technological solutions downstream.
Is there not a similar issue appearing with sewage as well? That we're washing clothes, a lot of clothes are plastic. There's a lot of plastic, microplastic going into the sewage system, and then that's been treated, and that's effectively either been discharged or it's ending up in the sludge, and then we're applying that land back to the land. And there's not, my understanding, there's not a huge amount of detail and data and investigation about that either, that potentially we're storing up quite significant problems for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. So I think if you think about sewage treatment as the two outputs that come out of it, we get water out of it that we then discharge to the rivers, and we get biosolids, which in the UK we tend to spread to agricultural lands. So it's I guess, if your filtration is really effective in the wastewater treatment, that it's coming out in the solid side of it, in the biosolids, and that is, if it's not treated any further, then that's being spread to agricultural land. And there's a big concern around in lots of the water companies around whether that will be more heavily regulated in the upcoming years, because it's a really big concern to have, because it's currently our main outlet of sewage sludge treatment. And if the regulators, SEPA or the EA, were to turn around and say that's no longer allowed as an outlet, then I think we need to have a really big rethink of the outlets that we rely on. And then there's the other side of it, which is if your filtration isn't capturing the plastics in the solid side, then they're getting released into rivers, into water bodies and through the water cycle that way. So yeah, it's there's not really a happy ending, to be honest, whichever route they take.
Yeah, you can't do right for doing wrong, really, can you? You kind of think, right, we're recycling all this, and then the plastic's out there. You're turning your plastics into clothes and thinking that's a great thing, and then that gets washed, and then it's out in the sewage sludge. It's like, oh my goodness, what? Apart from saying, right, no plastics, it's a really difficult trying to find a solution.
It is really difficult, and I think it's kind of easy to say to say in theory, okay, well, let's just say that plastics are bad. And I don't want to say that all plastics are bad, because I think they've done a lot for our society and in medical uses and lots of things. And there's lots of non-single-use plastics that often get combined into the plastics are bad umbrella. But generally, I think the solution is that we need to, single-use plastics are a massive proportion of our plastic usage. And so I think we do need to accept that there's not going to be a downstream solution, really, or at least that I know of, that can solve this problem. So yes, I think cutting down our plastic usage is, in my opinion, the best way forward.
It's interesting because you think about one-use plastics or one-use things, and you think, right, okay, you can see the plastic straws, I can see, plastic knives and forks that you get given, but you think about all the plastics. So you think about your plastic, you buy a bottle of water, for instance, and that realistically you could use that bottle again and again, but most people don't. So is that a one-use plastic? It's like, it's like your butter tubs and things like that. Yep. The plastic tubs. Again, you finish that, you could wash it and then use it for, which I do actually, to be fair, because I'm very good at these things. Use it, to put things in the freezer and all that sort of stuff. So my plastic cupboard with all my plastic tubs is way too big, too enormous, and I've got too many plastic tubs.
You got too many tubs with not the right lids.
No lids.
That's what you're probably
yeah.
As always.
Well, it's the other way around. I've got too many lids, but they don't fit the plastic tubs. Yep. But again, it's like you look at a lot of this stuff, and it is all, if you could class it as one use.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I do the same as you, Jane, and I try and use them, but my plastics cupboard is ever growing, because obviously you reuse your margarine tubs and whatnot, but then you buy a new tub of margarine and you're like, oh, I've got an extra tub to use now. So I would argue that those all could be considered single-use plastics, and food packaging is a massive one of that, ranging from the plastic that you get on your broccoli, for instance, to tubs that you can reuse, but they're all not things that you intend to use forever, and it's not a very circular look on it, is it? Because if we were to use our margarine tubs and then take them back and refill them with margarine, then that would be a lot better, because we wouldn't keep getting new tubs.
Yes, can you imagine though? You imagine we'd be going down to the shops with our big bag of stuff, right? I've got my plastic bottle here to get some more juice in it. I've got my butter tub to get some more butter in it. I've got my packaging off my meat. Can I have some more meat in my packaging? Like, oh my goodness.
I know.
So yeah, sorry, I'm being a bit flippant here, but
no.
It is. I think we're so used to plastic, aren't we? And it's grown so much since it was first invented, and it's used for so many things, but so many, like, again, on food packaging, it's keeping the food fresher for longer and all these sort of stuff. So the advantages are definitely there, but like you say, there's also the disadvantages downstream. So yeah.
Yeah, and we are incredibly used to plastics, and as you say, it keeps food fresh, and our kind of global food system is now reliant upon that because we get food, we get apples in from Australia, etc., etc. But I think it's important to remember that we actually haven't had plastics for very long, at least in the scale that we use them. Even in the 50s and the 60s, people were maybe using Tupperware, and that was it, pretty much. And yes, a lot of our systems now are quite reliant on single-use plastics, but it's not to say that we can't at least try and cut it back to even just 50, 60 years ago.
See, we chatted about this briefly at the start, that you're not quite in the world of waste management, but you sort of are. So I'm going to ask you anyway, what brought you into looking at microplastics and waste treatment? What was the logic there?
I don't really know. I think I've just kind of followed what I was interested in, and then ended up.
You picked a topic.
Yeah. I don't know. I've always been really interested in waste and reducing waste, but also in water quality and kind of the regulations around that. And so I think I think I just got in a conversation with a couple of people about microplastics, and I actually got in a conversation with John Ferguson. I'm not sure if we've spoken about him before, but he'd been thinking about microplastic pollution from plastic recycling facilities, and I know him through completely externally to work and everything, and just had a really interesting discussion, and it kind of piqued my interest around in the intersection between water and waste. And then just somehow ended up delving into microplastics and plastic recycling, and and then don't know, it satisfied basically my interests in both. And now what I'm doing now is, I think I would like it to be a little bit more waste management orientated, but it still is, wastewater is still a pretty good intersection between water and waste, and we're looking into we're involved in some discussions about potentially co-treatment of waste and getting organics involved in certain co-treatments and stuff. So I think it's quite it's an interesting area between the two.
Yeah. No, you mentioned something that I was talking to John Ferguson fairly recently, actually, and I've just realised John Ferguson is not on my list of future guests.
Oh, so he definitely
John
should
Ferguson
be. He's an interesting
probably
guy.
needs to be on my list of future guests for the podcast, because
absolutely
he's got a lot of good knowledge about the certainly the plastic recycling and so on. Just out of interest, what was your actual degree in? What did you do first as a degree?
So my undergrad degree was in mechanical engineering. And then I was meant to be doing an integrated master's in that, and then decided I did not want to. And then I took a bit of time out, and then I went and did an MSc, which was really broad. It was a MSc in sustainability and environmental studies, and I just loved it. I loved it so much.
And that was at Strathclyde?
Yeah, so they were both at Strathclyde, yeah. I really enjoyed chatting to non-engineers and being involved in non-direct engineering work, and just getting such a variety of outlooks, and getting in more involved in kind of looking at the regulation of water quality and waste management and everything, and it was great. I loved it.
And I believe you're going to do a PhD, I think.
I am. I'm starting next week, actually. I'm
in what?
So in probably doesn't come as a surprise, but in microplastic pollution, but in looking into the fate and transport of microplastics in groundwater. So again, kind of a intersection between plastics and water quality, and I think it's a really interesting area because we don't really know very much about groundwater, and we don't really know very much about microplastics. So there's a lot of scope in that area, and it's also interesting because it coincides with, you know, as we discussed earlier, the outlet of biosolids to agricultural land. A lot of the concern about that is leaching from those biosolids into the soil and through the soil into rivers and into groundwater as well through the water table. So it's a really interesting area. Yeah, I'm really excited.
That's great. I'm quite because I'm a geologist. I studied geology and I did hydrogeology as part of one of my courses. And for me, plastics in groundwater is like, oh my
Scary.
goodness, that is really. It's like, right. So how does it get in there? How do we, you know, preventing that is quite difficult because I mean a lot of the aquifers and things like that, you know, are relatively deep. It depends whether we're looking at aquifers as in water, potable water, or whether we're looking at, you know, shallow aquifers that, you know, you could leach that material into. So I guess it's that sort of, yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah,
Scary,
really interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
I think really relevant in our current global situation as well, with lots more countries relying on groundwater for potable water use. And you know, lots more countries getting into aquifer recharge and things like that. Yeah, I think looking at whether microplastics can travel into those aquifers, but also looking at if we then draw water out, can they travel out again, or do they stay there, or we just don't really know very much about it.
Oh my goodness, Highland Spring will be vilifying you, Erina, I can tell.
I think we'll know lots more about it in a few years once you finish your PhD. I think that's the answer. The next question is probably a bit of an unfair question for somebody just starting their career, but any favourite roles or projects you've done so far? What's been the highlights? Normally, I guess I've got about 30 years of experience to dredge up here, but you've only got a couple.
Yeah, I think with only a year or two, it's difficult to say. I think some of the work that we're doing in our team, I think I mentioned it just earlier, looking at the potential for treating sewage sludge alongside other organics is a really exciting area that we haven't really looked into, because I think previously the sectors have been kept quite separate. So I think it's a really exciting time for like looking into possibilities around that. And then, yeah, I guess it's maybe a bit obvious, but as the you know, the research that I did it's absolutely been on microplastics. Sorry, it's absolutely been like my favorite thing, and there's a reason that I'm going to do a PhD in it.
Yeah, I guess that answers the question, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was, I think you told me there was quite a bit of press interest when your research came out. Was that difficult to handle, or was it all fairly sensible?
It was quite, it was really exciting. It was really exciting to see. I think one of my kind of bugbears is when academia stays solely within academia and doesn't really leach into industry or public knowledge or anything. So it was really exciting to see that the media, and through the media the public, were really interested in hearing about the research and hearing about plastic recycling and potential impacts of it. But yeah, we had lots of interest. We had a couple of radio interviews with like ABC, the Australian broad-based Australian radio, and the Canadian one, CBC, and then a couple of, well, one or two articles with like the Guardian. So yeah, it was super interesting. Quite a whirlwind, to be honest. It got quite tiring and stressful, and coincided with me starting my job as well. So it was quite a lot at the time, but very exciting.
Well, we've got a media star as well.
Another media star.
Goodness.
It's these young female guests we have in the programme. We had Laura Young, who's a media star, and now yourself. So there you go.
So I think you've probably kind of gone through this to some extent, but your current role, what are you trying to achieve in your current role? Because it does sound interesting, you know, with the sewage sludge side of it.
Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting. I think it's a really interesting time to be part of this team. Our team's great. It's growing really fast. It only got set up like 3 or 4 years ago. A lot of people in the team have come from water companies, so have that side of experience. So a lot of the work that we do is kind of strategy work for lots of the water companies, where, as we discussed earlier, there's concern at the moment around potential outlets no longer being risky and no longer being reliable. So a lot of what we do is strategy work on recommending maybe different technologies or different processes. And then that's quite like high level work that we do, and it spans all the way down to, we do quite in-depth process design as well. It all, mass balances of each process, which I'm not a process engineer, so I don't get massively involved in. But yeah, it's a really interesting span of quite high level and lots of regulatory advice as well, to quite in depth. And we do a lot of the work that we do is within the UK, and within the regulatory framework that we know, even though obviously it changes. I had to learn a lot of the English regulations when I joined the team, because they're slightly different from the Scottish regs. But we're now expanding to out of the UK as well, so it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, it does. It sounds really interesting. With all the things that you're doing, has that changed your sort of opinions and habits outside the workplace, or are you, I get the feeling that you were quite sustainable, and you quite had your recycling all in place, but now I'm thinking, are you actually recycling your plastics? Because now you know what happens.
That's a really good question. I've spoken to so my supervisor while I was doing my master's, who initially was the one I was involved with all the plastic recycling research. Her and her husband are great. They both do microplastic research, and they're really into it. And he had some kind of interesting opinions on. I don't know if this is what I agree with, but he was saying plastic recycling is worse than landfilling plastic. I think it's a completely personal opinion. But it definitely, as you say, I've always tried to to be a good citizen, do my recycling, etc., and cut down the waste that I was producing in the first place. But I think looking more in depth into all the plastic recycling impacts or potential impacts has made me even more aware. I wouldn't say I have stopped recycling, but I think I've just made more of a concerted effort to cut down on the plastic that I use in the first place. And I've actually just moved to Birmingham in the past month or so, and there's no zero waste shops here, and it's such a shame coming from Glasgow where there was loads. And so I think it's made me even more aware of things like that, and just the opportunities that the public have to try and reduce their plastic consumption are so varied. And some people, I've spoken to people who have never heard of zero waste shopping, if that's what you want to call it. And yeah, I think personally I've tried to do that more and as much as I can, and maybe just chat to people more in the least annoying way as possible about reducing their plastic consumption.
I think it's an interesting point about the plastic. I used to deliver the Chartered Institute Waste Management Waste Smart course, and it was all about waste hierarchy and sustainability. And one of the things I used to do, just to make a point, was I always used to say to people, we should stop recycling plastic. We should just incinerate it all. We should just capture the energy, because it's effectively oil, recover the energy. We're wasting our time recycling, because one of the challenges you've got in the UK is everybody assumes we can recycle plastic really well. And in actual fact, it's probably one of the hardest materials we've got. It's light, it's hard to collect, it's expensive to collect, it's really expensive to process. It's got a lot going against it in terms of the actual recycling. And you know, if you add into that what you're saying about the microplastics at the end that were potentially, you know, creating a big issue there, then maybe we do need to look at that a bit more closely and say, well, is it worth doing all that effort in terms of recycling plastic?
Yeah,
the waste to energy guys love me at the moment for saying that. It's not an official view, by the way. It's just that I'm just putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to add to the complexity that you said there, Alistair, I think a lot of people forget that there's loads of different types of plastic as well, and that they're all quite different from each other, and they all can act quite differently. And you know, that wasn't really one of the things that we focused on in the research, but it's a interesting question of, do certain plastics break down more or give off more microplastic pollution? You know, there's a lot of complexity that people don't think about. But I think one of the reasons, I think in my opinion, one of the main reasons that plastic recycling is kind of the main waste management for plastics, is that it's a way to make the public feel better about using plastics. I think, you know, I was brought up being told that recycling was really good, and I don't want to say that it's not, because I absolutely, like, it's much better than landfilling or doing other ways of managing the waste. But I was brought up being told that I was doing good if I was recycling.
A good citizen recycling.
Absolutely. And so I think it's a good method of making people feel not quite as bad about continuing our increasing plastic consumption. To be a bit cynical there.
Yeah, no, it's a bit like the argument about bottled water. Bottled water, they're not selling bottled water, they're selling plastic bottles. And if every single person in the UK never bought one bottle, that's 60 million bottles we don't need to recycle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you think about it like that, you think, well, you know, do we actually really need to buy a bottle of plastic, for water when we've got a tap? But that's, we'll not start that one quickly.
I'm going to be a bit controversial there, because some of the water that I've tasted, the Scottish water is lovely, I must say, or most of the Scottish water I've tasted is lovely. But you go down into some places in England, I don't know what you're like, Erina, in Birmingham, but some of it just tastes disgusting. So anyway, moving on.
There is that. So busy life. You've just moved to, did you say Manchester? Birmingham.
Yeah.
Birmingham's quite nice now, actually. Birmingham's quite.
It is quite nice.
Yeah.
I live, the centre of Birmingham at least is very nice, and I think there's been a lot of money put into it. So yeah, it's really nice. And I've just moved here for my PhD, which is the reason that I've moved, because the University of Birmingham's got some really good research going on, and my supervisors are really involved in some really exciting research. But yeah, no, it's good. I'm living on a canal boat in the centre of Birmingham, so it's cool. It's exciting.
I once, when I was very young, I was teaching skiing in France. Sorry, I'm going off a total tangent here. Teaching skiing in France, and I had to get myself back to London, spend a couple of days in London, and then I was going someplace else. I had the best Easter holiday of my life. I went to about 4 different places, but I ended up staying with this guy in a canal boat, and he was like, he bought this boat for about 60 grand at the time, and he said, "See that house over there? That's like 3.5 million." And he was that's where he lived, right in the centre of London. So there you go. That's cool. So what's your hobbies? How do you get away from work apart from lounging about do you move your canal boat? Do you take it places?
I could do. I don't at the moment. My neighbours are really lovely, and it's a really nice area that I'm in, and also my engine's got some problems at the moment. So theoretically, yes, I could do. But in practice, I do not move it much at the moment. But other than that, I do quite a lot of yoga, some climbing, and some running just to get outside. It's trying to get. It doesn't speak very well for Birmingham, but I spend most of my weekends trying to get out of Birmingham.
That's allowed. That's allowed.
Yeah.
So how did the canal boat come about? What was the logic there?
So it's been in. So my family owns it,
Right.
and it was a big faff actually. It was in Edinburgh before, near Haymarket, and I decided it was a good decision to move it down to Birmingham. So we organised it, and because it wasn't being used at the moment, and like someone had just moved off in Edinburgh, so it was a good time, and it's really cool being on the.
It went by road.
Oh, it did go by road, yeah.
Have you worked out the carbon impact of that? Have you?
No, I haven't.
I'm just thinking about the logistics of getting via canals all the way down to Birmingham.
Well,
I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's really nice it being on the English canal system actually, because obviously the Scottish canals they're pretty limited. yeah, you can come out of Edinburgh and you can go pretty much one way. So it's really exciting. Like a lot of my neighbours have travelled around a lot. You can go to North Wales, you can go to London, you can go to Bristol. There's lots of opportunity. So it's nice being around here.
Brilliant. I like it. The next question we've actually probably discussed is what's next for your career. You're going to do your PhD. Are you going to keep working? Are you doing that part-time then? Are you working?
Yes.
PhD, is that the plan?
Yeah, part-time working, so I'm a little bit worried for my work-life balance, but going to be part-time working and part-time PhD as well.
And how long's PhD over?
So full-time, it would be 3.5 years. Part-time, the plan is for it to be about 5, right. Potentially 6. We'll see.
That's quite a commitment, isn't it? It's quite a commitment from a PhD and work-wise as well. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. What about moving on? So you've shared quite a lot of facts so far about the amount of microplastics in the water and stuff like that. But is there one fact out of all of those that you know, some of them you haven't said about, you'd want to share from your sector, which you think people may not know?
I would say there's a lot of facts I would like to share, but I guess in terms of in plastics and microplastics, I think a lot of people, when you say microplastics, they think the kind of the beads that are like added as small particles, essentially primary microplastics. I think it's important, and that's a lot of what my research was looking into, is the secondary particles which are broken down from larger ones, and that's both in the processes like we looked at in plastic recycling, but also out in the environment. So, you know, a plastic bottle doesn't necessarily, it doesn't just remain as a plastic bottle out at sea. It also is broken down by the wind and the rain and everything. And so I think it's that. I think a lot of people, when you say microplastics, they think of like the primary microplastics that are manufactured as small particles, and it's just remembering that there's another side of them as well, which is not as heavily regulated, because it can't be regulated because it's just a breakdown of plastic, and that the particles themselves, although we talk about them as, you know, plastic particles, basically act as little sticky Velcro balls essentially. So, you know, they, as well as being a plastic particle, they also act as a vector for loads of chemicals that we try quite hard to regulate and to reduce, like endocrine disrupting chemicals and, you know, things like that. So it's just remembering that when we say plastic particles, it's that plus a big load of additional things.
You're getting even more scary now, Erina.
Sorry.
I was like, oh my goodness.
You do wonder, you know, there's so little known about the health implications of these plastic particles, you do wonder if this is the next big asbestos type thing, looming, that we're absolutely blindly oblivious to at the moment because we don't understand it, or we've not looked into it closely enough.
Sorry, I feel like
that's even
really
more scary.
depressing.
No, that is even more scary. But it needs people like yourself to look into it. It needs people like yourself to look into it and research it and find out what the issues are. Once, I think probably we've got quite a good record. Once we actually find out what issues are, we're probably quite good at sorting them out. But as you said earlier, until we know the size and scale of the problem, then we're never going to address it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, moving a bit wider, any habits or changes that you would try and encourage the public to try and improve how the masses recycle and their own sustainability? There's probably loads of things you can think of, but top tips here.
Basic one that I think I've probably said enough now is that we just need to cut down on the plastic we use. But I think a bit of a random one that isn't really directly to do with plastics necessarily, but Tetra Paks are another slight bugbear of mine, and I think a lot of people, and I used to just lump them in with my plastic recycling, and a lot of people don't realize that they're actually a composite of lots of different materials and that they need to be recycled separately. So it's a bit of a random one, but I think that would be
I think it's interesting. I think we've touched on this before. Some of the manufacturers are moving towards Tetra Pak because the carton feels like it's cardboard. So I think the logic is the consumer thinks it's cardboard, therefore it's recyclable, therefore it's. But as you say, these Tetra Paks are generally cardboard, they're plastic, they're often aluminium foil, they're often a couple of different types of plastic, so they're actually quite hard to sort of genuinely recycle. So anyway,
sorry if that's come up before.
No, we've talked about it before. No, but nobody else has come up with that one. And it's interesting. There is actually only one. There's one paper mill in the UK that's got a specific line for taking Tetra Paks, and I think what they do is they wash off the cardboard and they recycle the cardboard. I have no clue what they do with the plastic. Whether that's going to any place. And now you mentioned it, probably they've not actually measured the microplastics coming off that process either. They're now going into our cardboard. So
it's a can of worms, honestly.
Absolutely.
Can of plastic.
So we always ask all our guests for an acronym, their favourite acronym. Any favourites you've got? There's certainly loads of plastic acronyms, but
there are. Yeah, I can't promise that this one hasn't come up before because I think it's just such a good one. But I think so. When I started in my team here, it's just a minefield of acronyms in waste management, but particularly within consultancy. I think people just, I don't know, get lazy or don't want to say full words, just love to throw them out, but MAD is one that I like, which is mesophilic anaerobic digestion.
We've not had that one before.
It's a certain temperature of anaerobic digestion, basically. The mesophilic is about the bacteria, but people just, obviously just throw it into conversation, and I think it's ironic because I think the world of acronyms is a bit mad, and they'll that one's one that I quite like.
What was the one we had last week, Jim? Was it that we'd spotted WUDs? So SEPA come out with WUDs, and this is what waste upholstered domestic seating. And this came out in a guidance document from SEPA, and I'm like, what on earth? Or what? At least if you're going to use it, like spell it out in full in the first sentence so that people know. So it was a guidance note about POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and WUDs, and that was the title just about it. And I was like, what on earth is that? So, fortunately, as usual, Google helped me out. So yeah, I like that one. We'll add that one to the list. And now you've got your chance for having a magic wand to sort out the mad world of waste management.
Yes.
What would you like to use it for?
Maybe it's quite a broad one, but I would just want, I think I would change our policy, the current rate of policy change basically around plastics and single-use plastics. And I think, Alistair, we spoke about this briefly, but it feels a bit of a drip feed of individual items, of individual single-use plastic items being regulated and no longer allowed, like plastic spoons and whatnot. And I think if I had a magic wand, I would want more changes to be made at a much faster rate, basically.
Yeah, I think we'd all like that to some extent, wouldn't we?
Yep. So just get me that wand.
Some braver decisions to be made.
Yeah.
You know, just go out there, and I always go back to the banning smoking in pubs campaign. And there was a very vocal minority wanted to keep smoking in pubs, and the vast majority of people wanted to stop it. And that seemed to just drag on forever. And I think sometimes in the environmental side, I think it's a bit like Wales going down to 20 miles an hour for their speed limit. You know, sometimes you just get brave and say this is what's happening, and get on with it and get the benefit, the environmental benefit, and so on. So yeah. Good one.
So, do you have any advice for anybody wanting to follow a similar career path to yourself, coming into the waste industry, or where would you tell them to look?
Oh, I think, so it's maybe different for me because my role in the team that I work in is not directly waste management related. But I felt like I kind of just fell into it. I think me doing the masters that I chose to do was crucial, to be honest, because I realized that I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer, by trade and design pumps all day. And I think I took a bit of a leap. I ended up having to pay for my MSc, for instance, thanks fast loans. But it felt a bit of a leap at the time to go away from the obvious integrated master's path that I could have stuck with in the mechanical engineering, and I'm so glad I did. And I think it was just that I realized that the sustainability aspects of my engineering degree were what I was more interested in, and so I just went and found something that was more of that. It was more of what I was interested in, and then my MSc thesis was a bit of an extension of that. I just I instead of, I think a lot of unis will give you like set theses that you can do that supervisors have suggested, and I realized what I was interested in and I wrote a proposal for myself. So I think I've just ended up here because I've just done what I wanted, what I was interested in, and I didn't plan on ending up in a certain career, to be honest. But I'm really happy with where I am at the moment. It's sectors that I'm really passionate about and really interested in, and I think I've just got here because I did what I wanted to do without sounding too basic.
No, I think that's really important because I was the same. I kind of did my geology degree, and my sort of thesis or whatever dissertation was on landfill, and geology and landfill, and then that kind of went from there, because again it was what I was interested in. I was interested in contamination and how it all happens. So yeah, I think you're right. Follow what you want to do, because if you follow what you want to do, then, or what you're interested in, then you stay interested in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think there was enough sustainability type stuff built into your degree when you did it?
I think I noticed it increased even in the 4 years that I was there. And I know Strathclyde as a uni were aimed to get a lot more discussion about sustainability and SDGs and everything into all their courses, not just like the maybe immediately relevant ones. So yeah, I guess if the rate continues, then absolutely. But I would say in my first and second year, it didn't feel like there was that much. I think we did some things on sustainable development goals and some discussion on the water side of that, I think, or that was maybe something that I kind of picked to do in that. And so that was me picking, what I wanted to do. But I would say there should be more. My degree still felt quite like it was still structured around quite a traditional engineering degree structure. Every year we did thermodynamics, we did fluid mechanics, and we did this and we did that. And there was never a module that was mandatory, that was in sustainability or anything like that. And so I think that would be something that unis probably need to introduce more. But yeah, I can't speak for what they're doing now. And I did see an increase while I was there, which is hopeful.
It's interesting, the Sustainable Resource Management one, myself and Jane lecture at Edinburgh Uni / SRUC, that's done as an elective. So quite often you've actually got people that are doing their sort of the waste related course, if you like, and then about 75% of the class are people doing economics and accounts and all, a whole random lot of subjects, because they're desperate to get that sort of waste sustainability type knowledge as well into their own degrees. So
that's great to see.
It's interesting how it's changing. Yeah,
that's really good to see. Definitely. Yeah, I think there was it was made difficult in my undergrad degree because there wasn't much scope to do electives apart from in the first year or so. But I think there are quite a lot of like elective classes you can do out there that, as you say, people in completely different degrees can go in and do something that they're interested in. And maybe it's just recognizing that you should give people throughout their degree more opportunity to go and do those electives, rather than giving them an opportunity in 1 year and then saying, right, now you have to do your degree and your degree only.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think that's us run out of questions for you.
Okie doke.
So thank you very much for your time. Fascinating insight into the world of microplastics and the potential difficulties that arise from them. So
no problem at all. I'm sorry if it was a bit of a downer.
No, I think we've got to people need to be aware of these things. It's there's always problems and there's always ways to find solutions. We've just got to put the right heads together to get the solutions. So, and as I said earlier, we're better known about it now than 20 years time when it's got much bigger impact. So
yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Erina. That was really interesting.
Yeah, no problem. I had a very interesting discussion. Thank you both too.
Yeah, and thank you very much, and good luck on your canal boat. I'm actually quite jealous. I'm quite jealous of an old canal boat, actually.
I think
next time I'm in Birmingham, I'm going to be in touch saying, I'm down in Birmingham, I want to see your boat.
I think if you're ever jealous, just think about sitting in your nice cozy house on a December night and you won't be jealous anymore.
You can't beat it. So, okay. Well, thank you very much.